They said I had 6 months to live. A generous estimate, considering the sharp ache behind my ribs that kept spreading like ink in water. At 78, I was a man of quiet wealth built from decades of deals, late nights, and losing more than I gained, until I didn't. But death doesn't care about your balance sheet. I had been faithfully taking my pills morning and night, until one morning, out of habit, I flipped the label and noticed something I had missed all along. The medication wasn't for stabilizing my heart. It was accelerating my decline. That was the morning I knew someone close wanted me gone. And with the annual family dinner approaching, I decided I wasn't going to leave this world quietly. Before we dive into the story, we'll love to thank you for your continued support to this channel. If you enjoy this story and stories like this, kindly subscribe and hit on the notification button so you don't miss any of our stories. Our shout out goes to Patrick from Palm Springs, California, USA. We will love to hear from you also. Tell us where you're watching from in the comment section. We'll love to give you a shout out in our next video. Now let's begin. The house was dressed for celebration, but my soul wasn't. I watched from the top of the stairs as relatives poured in, smiling, laughing, hugging like actors who had rehearsed their parts. My lawyer told me not to say anything just yet, but I never took advice well, especially not from men younger than the scotch I drank. I had switched my medication a week ago, replaced the capsules with placebos I kept from an old trial. I started to feel better, sharper, clearer. That's when I realized I was being slowly erased, not by time, but by someone at my own table. I sat at the head, where my father used to sit before he passed, the same way I was supposed to go too soon and too quietly. The room buzzed with forced warmth. The children were already picking at the desserts, and the wine glasses clinked like tiny alarms. I looked at them all, my children, their spouses, cousins, even the neighbors who somehow always got invited, and then I cleared my throat. Everyone turned. I placed my fork down and tapped my glass twice with the handle of my spoon. They knew something was coming. I could feel it in the way they straightened up, like kids waiting to be scolded. Before we dig into the roast, I said, letting the silence swell, I just have one question. Who did it? Forks froze midair. Shoes were left unfinished. The pianist who always played from the hallway stopped mid-note. I could hear someone swallow hard. Maybe my eldest son, maybe the neighbor's jittery husband. My voice hadn't been loud, but it carried. I'm talking about the pills, I said slowly, my eyes scanning every face. The ones that were supposed to help me live, but instead made things worse. Someone switched them. A wave of cold silence passed through the room. Some looked confused. Others looked too blank to be innocent. That's when my youngest niece, little Clara, barely 16 and seated closest to the children's end of the table, stood up with her lower lip trembling. Her voice cracked as she spoke. They forced me to. I snapped to her. I didn't know what it was for at first, she continued, tears brimming. They just said it was to help Grandpa rest better. They made me put the pills back after switching the bottles. I thought it was vitamins. I felt a sharp pain, not in my chest, but in my heart. Clara looked straight at me, her eyes pleading for something I didn't know if I still had. Forgiveness. I'm sorry, she whispered. They said if I told, I'd ruin everything. She didn't say who they were, but she didn't need to. I already had a feeling, and I was ready to expose the rest. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let the weight of Clara's confession sit heavy in the room like fog refusing to lift. My fingers curled around the arms of my chair, knuckles pale against the polished mahogany. Everyone was watching me, but I was watching them. Watching for the twitch in a brow, a shifting glance, a breath held too long. Guilt doesn't always scream. Sometimes it trembles. Sometimes it hides behind too much calm. I looked toward my middle son, Raymond. His hands were steady on his wine glass, but his jaw had locked like a rusted hinge. Clara collapsed back into her chair, her eyes now cast down, as if releasing the truth had drained the last of her courage. "Who told you to do it, Clara?" I asked gently. "Look at me, child. Who made you do it?" Before she could respond, my daughter-in-law, Raymond's wife, cleared her throat loudly and stood up. "Dad, she's just a child. Let's not turn this evening into some kind of witch hunt," she said, her tone strained with civility. "It's a lot of pressure." Maybe she misunderstood something she overheard, but her words trembled under the weight of desperation. And desperation, I've learned, always leaks from the guilty first. "Sit down, Evelyn," I said with a calm that burned. "You'll have your turn." Her face went pale as she slowly returned to her seat. Raymond spoke next, his voice low but defensive. "You're getting old, Dad. Maybe you're confused, paranoid. Do you even have proof someone switched your medication?" His words weren't just careless, they were rehearsed. And it made sense now. Raymond had the most to gain. The will was no secret. He'd inherit the estate, the properties, the company shares. But I wasn't a dying man anymore. I had clarity. I had rage. And soon, I'd have the truth. I turned to my lawyer, Mr. Adelstein, seated quietly in the corner like a shadow. He rose and walked to my side, opening a folder from his briefcase. "As requested," he said. "I had the medication independently tested by a lab outside this state. The results confirmed. What Mr. Hollingsworth was consuming was not prescribed by his physician. It was laced with substances known to induce cardiac stress and accelerate deterioration in patients with heart conditions." Gasps rippled around the table like aftershocks. And just then, Clara raised her hand again, barely above the tablecloth, as if asking permission to speak. I remember the day," she whispered. "Uncle Raymond asked me to help him clean out the medicine cabinet in Grandpa's study. He said Grandpa wouldn't notice the switch. He handed me the bottle and gave me the new one. He said it was just stronger vitamins. He even promised to buy me a car for graduation if I helped." Her eyes filled again, and she buried her face in her hands. That was all I needed. I nodded once. "Adelstein, proceed with the next step," I said. "Let's not wait for the grave before the truth is buried." Raymond pushed back from his chair, but it was already too late. Raymond's chair screeched against the marble floor as he stood, face flushed and fists clenched. "You're seriously taking the word of a child?" She's confused. "You're all being ridiculous," he snapped, but his voice cracked under the pressure. His wife looked away, already sensing the tide shifting. My other children stayed quiet, too afraid to defend him or too uncertain of their own innocence. I studied Raymond, not as a father studies a son, but as a judge studies a man already condemned. "You never could resist a shortcut, Raymond," I said coldly. "But trying to bury me to collect early? That was your final mistake." Mr. Adelstein opened another file and handed it to me. Inside were financial records I'd been gathering secretly for months, Raymond's offshore accounts, strange transactions, hidden properties bought in the names of shell companies. I tossed it on the table. "You thought I wasn't paying attention, that I was too old to notice. But I've been buying time, not wasting it." He looked stunned, like a man realizing the trap he built had been used to snare him instead. "The board already voted last week. You've been removed from your position at the firm. Your shares have been frozen. The life you were trying to steal? It's already gone." Raymond's mouth opened, then shut, and for a moment he looked like a boy again. Cornered, helpless, undone by his own greed. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I built half of that company." I leaned forward, my voice as sharp as the edge of the will that had already been revised. "You built nothing without my name, and you tried to kill that name. Now, you'll live with what you've done. You won't be arrested, not by me. No, I want you to walk out of this house and explain to the world how you tried to kill your own father. I want you to see what disgrace really feels like." He stood frozen for a moment longer, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the crystal chandelier. Silence returned to the room like a final curtain drop. I sat back, breath slow but steady. I looked around the table, not with anger anymore, but with a bittersweet resolve. Let this dinner be the last one we ever have like this, I said. From here on, no masks, no lies, no pretending. I turned to Clara. You were brave. You were honest. That will be remembered. And then I raised my glass, water, not wine, to the truth, however late it arrives. The room emptied slowly, as if guilt had gravity, dragging each guest out one by one. Some mumbled farewells, some avoided eye contact altogether. Only Clara stayed close, her small hand resting on mine like an apology that didn't need words. I let her sit with me in the silence. I had planned this night down to the minute, but now that it had passed, I felt no victory, just a strange hollowness. Revenge doesn't fill a soul, it just empties the poison. I had stayed alive longer than they expected, but not because I feared death. I stayed because the truth needed a witness, and that witness needed to be me. They thought I was weak. They saw the canes, the missteps, the quiet hours in the study, and assumed I was fading. But I had never seen more clearly. It was my diagnosis that lit the fire. When I realized my pills weren't helping but hurting, I didn't run to the doctors. I ran to the facts. I hired private investigators, rechecked every will, tracked every bank wire. I rewrote my estate, not to favor loyalty, but to punish betrayal. And still, in all my planning, I hadn't expected Clara. Her innocence, her courage. That one spark of decency left in this tangled family tree reminded me why it mattered to tell the truth before I left this earth. I stood from my seat, slowly, gripping the table edge for balance. Clara helped me. "Grandpa," she whispered, "what happens next?" I looked down at her, the only one who had spoken out when the cost was fear. "You," I said softly, "will never need to be afraid again." I reached into my coat pocket and handed her a small envelope. "It's a trust. It activates on your 21st birthday. No one else can touch it. Not your parents. Not the lawyers. Just you." Her eyes widened, and she shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't deserve this," she said. I smiled, for the first time that night. "Exactly why you do." Later, when I sat by the fireplace, the flames crackling like soft applause, I pulled out a journal I hadn't opened in years. I began writing again, not for business, not for law, but for memory, for legacy, the kind that isn't measured in land or dollars, but in the courage it takes to speak when silence feels safer. My days were numbered, but that no longer haunted me, because I had made every one of them count. And now, if the end came, I could face it, not with regret, but with the peace of a man who refused to be erased quietly. 2 days after the dinner, I felt something shift in my chest, not pain, but a strange calm, like the final page of a story that had waited too long to be written. I called Adelstein and told him to deliver the sealed envelope on my behalf, but only when the moment felt right. "It's not for court," I told him. "It's for clarity. For her." Inside that envelope was a letter. Handwritten, deliberate, every word etched with the weight of betrayal. Because as much as Raymond played his part, there was one puppeteer who had pulled the strings from the very beginning, and she had escaped the room that night, almost unnoticed. I had loved her once, Evelyn, not just as my son's wife, but as the woman I had personally welcomed into the family with pride. Her ambition, her charm, it all felt like fresh wind to a stale household. But behind her elegant laughter hid something colder. She'd been the one who suggested Raymond oversee my medications. She had planted the idea that I needed stronger supplements and made sure Clara was always nearby when the switch was needed. Raymond was greedy, yes, but Evelyn was strategic. The kind of cunning that doesn't just want the throne, but the crown and the history behind it. And I had watched it all unfold like a man trapped behind glass until I shattered it. The letter described her movements, her manipulations, her off-record meetings with a pharmacy tech now under investigation. I had recordings, gathered weeks before the dinner. Clara's confession wasn't the only evidence. It was just the one that broke the silence. But it was Evelyn who had poisoned more than my body. She had poisoned the soul of this family. You underestimated the old man. I wrote in that letter. But the old man never underestimated you. I didn't request her arrest. I didn't need her in handcuffs. The real punishment was worse. Her reputation torn, her schemes exposed, her legacy reduced to shame. I signed the letter not as Dad or father-in-law, but simply Edgar Hollingsworth, still breathing. And when she read those words, I imagine her composure finally cracked. I imagine she realized this wasn't just a dinner gone wrong. This was a legacy restored. Clara later told me Evelyn moved out the same week, leaving Raymond behind in disgrace. My lawyer informed me that Evelyn had tried to contest the trust clause I left for Clara, but the courts shut her down within hours. Justice didn't need thunder to strike. Sometimes, it just needs the truth spoken at the right time, loud enough to echo through silence. I recorded it on a cold Thursday morning. Just me, a camera, and a heart that no longer beat in fear. My hands were steadier than they'd been in months. The file was labeled simply, "For after I'm gone." I didn't know exactly when the end would come, but I no longer feared it. In the recording, I didn't cry, didn't preach. I just told the truth. If you're watching this, I said calmly, then I'm no longer here. But I want you to know, this was never about revenge. It was about memory, and making sure no one rewrote mine. The room behind me was dimly lit with soft firelight, my favorite painting just over my shoulder. I spoke of Raymond, of Evelyn, and of Clara, not to shame, but to document. The moment we stop protecting the truth, we give power to those who lie with a smile, I said. I watched my own son become a stranger, my daughter-in-law weaponize kindness, and my niece nearly carry the guilt of adults twice her size. I paused, my voice low. But I also saw bravery in the youngest heart at the table. And because of that, I leave this world unafraid. I detailed how the company would now be co-managed by independent trustees until Clara came of age. I outlined new scholarships, new charities, ones funded by assets I had hidden from greedy hands long ago. My last move wasn't about punishing my family. It was about cleansing the name I built. I don't need statues, I said. Just stories that are told honestly. And if you remember me, remember that I wasn't quiet when it mattered most. I ended the video the way I had always ended our family toasts, with a raised glass. But this time, it was water, not wine. To truth, I said, and to those with the courage to speak it. The video was never meant to go viral. But it did. Within days of my passing, someone leaked it. It spread not just in my town, but across the country. Newspapers called me the man who confronted his killers with a dinner invitation. Some mocked, most admired. But what mattered most was this. Clara was no longer afraid. She stood tall at my funeral. She read my favorite passage from the journal I left behind. And when she finished, she looked out over the crowd and said, "He wasn't just my grandfather. He was the last honest man in a house full of secrets." They buried me under the oak tree I planted when I was 30. No monuments, just a stone engraved with 6 words, "Here lies a man who asked." And now, long after the silence of that final dinner, I rest, not in fear, not in bitterness, but in peace. Because I didn't leave quietly. I made sure they all heard me. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the power of truth, even when it hurts. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the deepest wounds, and the boldest legacies are born not from wealth, but from courage. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter, stories that speak when others stay silent. Until next time, stay strong, stay true. See you soon in our next story.